And welcome to the one recap where we are recapping everything about the Rings of Power Season 2. I am your host, Kofi Outlaw, and with me today in a little bit of a blurred fashion, it looks like, is my co-host, Jamie Lovett, who's keeping his identity anonymous over there.
Am I blurred?
Jamie, can you...
That's
hear me?
weird. It looks fine to me. I can hear you.
Oh, that's okay. Maybe it's on my side. I don't know.
I am just vibrating at a different frequency and kind of existing across the multiverse at all points. So that's why I might look a little funny.
Okay. Well, yeah, this continues our technical challenges era that we're currently in, but we're going to push through and yeah, let's get to talking. So we are here to recap the Rings of Power Season 2, Episode 5. We're on Episode 5, right? I'm beginning to get lost.
Yes. Sounds right to me, yeah.
Yep. We are in Episode 5, and yeah, picking back up with our discussion. We were really kind of high on Episode 4 of the show. We really enjoyed it, and we were both kind of wondering if Rings of Power was starting to actually make this turn, because both of us have not been so dismissive of the show to say like we shouldn't be watching this, but we have had, what I think are pretty fair critiques about where things are going right and where things are maybe not going so right and could be maybe turned a little bit. Last week, we kind of highlighted a balance of delivering, basically an entire Lord of the Rings movie experience in an episode where we got action, drama, romance, darkness, scary stuff, and, wit, humor. Like, we got it all. This episode, you saw it early. I saw it just in real time with the audience we were talking about. And I asked you just to give me a heads up about, like, what it was that we were getting in this episode. And I think you really nailed it by saying, this episode is called Halls of Stone. It's a very Game of Thrones-y episode, I would say, of Rings of Power, in the sense that it's mostly about conversations in rooms and what kind of shifting dynamics those conversations are illustrating as we're having them. And I thought this was pretty great. I was really kind of came away from this episode being like, Rings of Power may really be cooking right now, and we're finally cooking, because I think this episode centers in on and does so many things right about what the real meat of this show is, which is the story, the actual mechanics. It's doing for Lord of the Rings when it's working. And I think this episode made me realize how some ways misguided that first season really was. Because we didn't actually get to the Rings of Power. And then seeing this episode, I'm like, okay, now this is why you make this show. And it's doing for Lord of the Rings what Andor did for Star Wars, in my opinion, which is taking on the hard task of showing you how, evil or corruption or these negative, bad things in the world begin to roll out, and how it takes the decisions and temptations, and even for the best of reasons, these minor compromises that begin to build up and stack on one another until you've got like a real significant problem in the world in darkness. And this episode was the first one to really open up and really get into that. And I thought it was fantastic. Just watching, and it's because also they rely now on the cast a lot more. Because these rings are not characters. They're not, we don't have like talking ring guy as a character in this. This is all very stage play. Like, it's just the actors in rooms talking and having to really sell us on what's going on in the subtext of each of these scenes. And this was so well done in that way. Like, Charles Edwards as Celebrimbor really shines in this episode. I forget the name of the actor who plays Doran 3, Peter Mullen as Doran the Third. Watching them convey this the shifting personality and the changes in their characters because of these rings and or in Celebrimbor's case, the influence of Charlie Vickers as Anatar. That's really fascinating stuff that is classic. It doesn't require a bunch of special effects. Like I said, it just requires actors, stage, acting, and, now we're seeing the parts of lore come alive that we really want to see. And even though we know kind of where a lot of these paths lead because of the lore, I'm no less invested right now in watching the step-by-step minutia of it and seeing how it affects others and just seeing who is drawn to these rings, who is kind of repelled by them and why. And yeah, all of that was pretty well done. And even in doing it and keeping an overall thematic framework, that even the more quote unquote boring parts that we've had, like Numenor, is tied in thematically in this episode in such a way that it all feels cohesive about the slippery slope of corruption and compromise. I thought it was a really great episode. Jamie, how'd you feel?
I agree. Like, I remember in our last recap episode, we talked about like, oh, we just got this big action heavy episode. And now I'm a little worried that next week is just going to be a lot of boring talky bits. And the episode was kind of exactly what we expected, except it was executed really, really well so that all the drama in those conversations was just as compelling as the action in last week's episode. Even the stuff in Numenor was much more compelling. If I had one critique of the episode, it's that some of the Numenor stuff felt a little almost over the top. Like, these guys aren't just bad; they're like, we're gonna kick you while you're down bad. Like, it is such a hard turn
to the church, bro. Like, come on.
Yeah, like, but turns out those guys are pretty bad in the source material. But that's a whole other thing. But yeah, like you said, like if you want to continue the comparison to Andor, what Rings of Power, now that it is at the part where we're talking about the Rings of Power, it's showing much like how Andor. So if you watch Star Wars movies, you're told the Empire is bad, and you like take that on faith because like they seem evil, and why not? That's how the story works. And if you've only seen the Lord of the Rings movies, you're told that the rings were evil and corrupted people, and you just take that and go with that. And that's fine. That works. That's all you need to know. But as Andor showed you like what the evil of the Empire actually looks like when you're living in it, Rings of Power is now showing you what the corruption of the rings looks like when you're dealing with it and how it affects not just the ring bearers, but all the people that they are responsible for overseeing. Like we get with Durin, in Tolkien's writings, the dwarves are essentially built so sturdy that Sauron isn't able to work his will on them through the rings. However, they're also greedy, and so they get really greedy and basically do, self-destruct, even though Sauron can't do it to them. And that's what we're seeing here is him, getting increasingly greedy, digging too deep, ordering essentially incredibly high taxes and tithes from all these other people if they want these ring gifts and all of this. And yeah, it's compelling because they built that relationship. If we didn't have that relationship between Durin and his son, I don't know that this would have been as compelling, but because we've seen that relationship and we're seeing it through, his eyes and Deese's eyes, and also we know what's lurking underneath, it makes it much more dramatic and makes it much more compelling. And then I think, though, my favorite part of the episode was the stuff in Eregion with Sauron and Celebrimbor, because the manipulation is so well done. Like the best line in the whole thing to me is when Sauron talks about how men are capable of great frailty, but also great heroics. And he lists a bunch of heroic men from the Silmarillion, Tuor and Erendil and Beren, all these great people who are ancestors of like Aragorn and Arwen and all that. That is a line that you could put in Gandalf's mouth, and he would say it sincerely and mean it, and it would be this great inspiration during the War of the Ring or whatever. But here, it's said by Sauron, who is doing it insincerely to manipulate. And that is such a perfect representation of what Sauron is, this deceiver that takes something that is meant to be good and that should be good and wraps it around a deception to serve his selfish purposes, all just encapsulated in like that one line in that one scene with him and Celebrimbor. So yeah, I'm really digging that. You know, the stuff in Iridian is developing very differently than how it goes in the books. Like the order of operations that eventually leads to this battle is basically going in reverse. But I think they're building it up to be a pretty good climax. And man, I just give me more of those scenes with Charlie Vickers and Charles Edwards, and I will watch those all day.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing him begin to, like I said, Charles Edwards' performance in this episode, and just seeing what's happening to him, you know, like by the end when he's giving the orders and then going to sit by himself and he's coming apart, like all of that is so well done. And yeah, a lot of this wouldn't work if there wasn't good scripts and kind of conception of how Sauron kind of manipulates people. And I love that they're really nailing it, that it's our virtues and kind of just slightly twisting, you know, people's biggest virtues, right? Like Celebrimbor is this great, you know, hard discipline creator, but it just takes a little tweak to turn that into vanity and to have him compromise himself entirely out of his own vanity. And so, again, I think, and hopefully this is going to become consistent, what the show is doing is giving us an actual authentic feeling rollout of how corruption works, and that it's not like this grand, only the evil orcs and trolls and goblins rose up out of the grounds when Sauron started walking around. And no, and it's like, yeah, this is, and I don't think Tolkien's works make it as clear or complex as it is, because it's just a retelling after kind of already happens, right? And so it's just like, yep, they happened, they made these decisions. But we're getting it in the thing to show, yeah, it's little compromises. And I think that's the point. It's not grand turns towards evil. It's little tiny compromises and multiple, you know, instances of that. And so, yeah, just to see everybody who's also helping make the rings and the forge and all the things they're ignoring. And, you know, that I love that they had the one elf girl in this who actually sees him when she puts on the ring, and he kind of has to manipulate her into thinking, oh, that's that other guy, because, you know, all of that. But her just being, you know, she starts out from such a genuine place, and by the end of the episode, you know, he has her completely. Like, she's now looking at Celebrimbor as like possibly evil dude, and, you know, sidling up to Sauron. And it's just that doubt that he kind of got from her and her fear. And it's so well done. And you begin to see how, like, yeah, how that web begins to spread and is now spreading into the dwarves and the king and his need to just, you know, provide, to be there for his people, to actually bring them hope and you know, good tidings is what begins to break him down. And you think he's so steadfast, you know, based on the relationship we saw with his son up until now. But yeah, it's nobody's kind of immune to that. So yeah, I was kind of impressed, but I agree with you. Let's turn to Numenor. That whole thing, I mean, it was very overly dramatic. I think the whole thing with the captain and his daughter and Isildur's sister is, yeah, I mean, it's a little heavy-handed. Like, I mean, by this episode, we're like, how do you feel about having a daughter who disappointed in you, like, and all of that? And it's like, yeah, I mean, you don't turn against your father necessarily that much. And it is kind of like, I never really buy the thing about the queen and everybody. I mean, I guess I do. Given current state of things, I can buy everybody turning against the queen pretty quick. But yeah, that feels still a little bit heavy-handed, but it was better than it's been. Even though I knew as soon as bro just let him go that guy was going to stab him through the heart. I was like, oh man, come on.
Yeah.
You don't
there was
turn
only
your back.
one way that ended.
Yeah, you don't turn your back on a little on a little worm like that before you get one through the chest. So yeah, I mean, but I think they're doing the job, which is, spoilers. We all know what happens to Numenor, and I think they're really just making us get to a place where by the time that happens, we're like, cool, like cool.
Yeah, I am wondering how quickly they're going to accelerate that fall, because we get real heavy foreshadowing with all the talk about the White Tower and Pharazôn obviously wanting what he cannot have. But Pharazôn is supposed to have, like, I don't know how much we want to say explicitly or spoil, but he's supposed to have a real big, last heroic moment involving Sauron before everything figuratively and literally goes down. And I don't know, like, he has taken such a, like, mustache twirling turn already that I don't know how that plays out. Because he's supposed to go, like, capture Sauron. And eventually that becomes his undoing. But, like, it's supposed to be such a glorious rescue that even the people who ally with Elendil, I'm getting my names crossed, even they, like, respect that and they build a monument to him for his victory. But here, like, those wounds are already so deep. There are already so many scars that it's hard to believe that would be the case. So I don't know if they're just going to skip that part or if they're going to play it as being a much more calculated and political move, and the respect he gains being much more begrudging than maybe it was implied to be in Tolkien's writings. But it'll be interesting to see how that's unpacked. I think the story's okay, and I think I don't think this episode, those scenes were awful. It's just they went from, like, 0 to straight up evil, like, overnight, friends, like, instantly.
Well, that's what I was saying about the daughter. It's like the daughter's willing to, like, tear down everything because her brother didn't come home. And it's like, yeah, that seems like a little heavy-handed. Like, I don't think, like, if you have all your father, Isildur's best friend, I forget his name, but who you've had, like, a crush on, and they're all coming back being like, nah, the queen went in there, she tried to save him, he was a hero, he did all this stuff, like, losing your stuff like that seems like a little far-fetched to me. Like, yeah. Numenor, like, is, and it's like one of those weird unforced errors, because it's at once not, like, the most interesting part of this series or story, but it is the place where the canon seems to be getting the most tangled up. Yeah. Like you said, our Pharazôn does have this whole crazy thing that needs to happen so that we can get to Return of the King and, all of the things we know about of Gondor and names like that we know. But yeah, I mean, just the timeline of all this, the whole thing about Isildur and kind of making him a focus is it has been one of the most kind of, like, tripped up things in this show. And I know why they're doing it. It seems also the most heavy-handed about kind of being like The Boys season 4 with, like, here's a society that's fracturing, there's this divide and nobody go, look, we could get a sinister eyebrowed man or a queen, like, which one do you want to choose? No significance to all. There's a big eagle. Don't think about any of this.
By the way, yeah. I forgot to mention this last episode, but, like, the eagles in Middle Earth can talk. Like, that eagle could have clarified who he was there to vote for, but he was just like, nah, I'm going to let these dudes handle this themselves.
No, he saw it. He was like, man, that's not my mess. I'm out of here. I'm getting out of here, guys. And he departed, and they were like, see, that's what it means. Eagle's like, bro, you guys are wild. But yeah, so, I mean, it is that, like I said, it's the most obvious tie to our current socio-political reality that's kind of going on in Numenor. But yeah, I am really curious how they're going to tie that all up and how long they're going to spend there, because this show really could cut a lot of significant budget by just wrapping that up by the end of this season. But like you said, there's like a whole thing, and I don't think it will. I think that won't wrap up probably, if I had to guess by pacing, till next season, because like you said, there's a whole thing about how it looks like, without getting too spoilery, like how Numenor comes into play in this initial skirmishes with Sauron and what happens after that, and the big significant shift that causes, and all of this is pretty significant. So I feel like we're not gonna get there. When that happens, I forget. I can't remember exact timing. Are the Rings of Men already out and about when this all goes down?
It's been a while since I've read that bit. I don't remember exactly. I think it happens before we get ring rates, because I think, God, someone's going to kill me if I get all this wrong, but I think the Rings of Men, some of them go to the like the colonies of Numenorian survivors. So it would be after the rings wouldn't go out till after the fall, if I remember right, after the whole sinking. But it's been a minute, so I might be getting the details wrong. Please don't hurt me if I have.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to read through some abridged Tolkien here.
Yeah, I'm trying. Like, it really, a lot of the timing, it's hard to figure out predict the timing of when these things are going to happen in the show without knowing where they plan to end the show. Like, if the assumption is they're going to condense all of the Second Age down into these proposed 5 seasons and end with, where the prologue in the Lord of the Rings movies start, then you would have to assume we probably get another season at least of Numenor before that falls. Like, maybe this season ends with the capture. Or maybe next season does. Either one could work. It's hard to say without knowing exactly how condensed this plans to be.
Oh man, yeah. I was reading through this story of like the cataclysm, all this stuff. Yeah, this is gonna be wild. I don't know what they're gonna do with some of this, because once you start getting into like Valar and all of that, like it's gonna get pretty wild. So I wonder, if we are gonna get into that, and literal shaping of worlds and all of that seems pretty out there. We could, but hey, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Now, if I had to predict, because this season seems to be all about timing, and how I also like that about how close to the timing everything is, how Sauron kind of just basically gets these things off right before it's too late, or just gets under the radar, by just the thinnest amount of not luck, but manipulation and circumstance. So I think this is kind of the race to see if we get all the rings completed before people figure out what's taken place. And I think that this season ends with like the rings having been completed, but Anatar having been outed, and then the third season becomes a much more kind of direct, we got to get this guy, but our side is deeply compromised type of war story. And
I wonder if this season, I don't think we get the fall of Numenor this season.
No, that's what I'm saying. I think
too fast. Yeah,
the rings. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We only got 3 more episodes, so no.
Oh, yeah. I forget. Them dropping those first 3 has thrown off my sense of where we are in this season. It still feels like we're on like the first couple episodes when actually we're halfway through, or more than halfway through.
Yeah. So we got 3 more episodes. So yeah, I think this last bit becomes about getting. We end kind of like the first season. We end with like 9 rings going out to men, and whatever way that might change canon, I think that's where we end up with that happening. But Anatar being outed and having to, deal with that, setting up a third season, which is basically, instead of Hunt for Spock or Search for Spock, it's just like the actual everybody together on the hunt for Sauron and dealing with this, while at the same time knowing that the good side is deeply compromised by these rings. So that's my prediction.
Do you think that Sauron is going to take control of Adar's host before they lay siege to Celebrimbor, or do you think he's going to slink off and hide some more and let his enemies fight each other?
I think that, I think he kind of, it's hard to say because they ended, they purposefully started the season with the whole thing between him and Adar. And so it would seem like if you're talking about seasonal full circles, it would end with him coming back around and, putting something through Adar's head
Right.
and being like, yeah, this was fun, but now this is mine. And I could see them doing that because obviously we're going to be taking some liberties with the canon now. And this is a TV show. So yeah, I could see that. And like I said, I think it's going to be next season that we get a more straight up war story where it's just like, yeah, Sauron has an army that he's kind of mustering. Everybody's aware now, and we start to see some of that early kind of fellowship, unification, kind of coordination, but everybody's deeply compromised as well, which is why they can't ultimately win and why bad stuff begins to happen. And of course, the ace in the hole, men, they get their rings and screw everything up. So
yeah,
that's kind of where we're going with that next season, which would be a great season. I'm not mad at that. Even if it changes some things around, I'm not at all mad at that. And let's be honest, this is not the first time the Lord of the Rings movies or live action adaptations have changed things around for the sake of big battles. I mean, we're kind of steeped in that history. You can argue about it all you want. I still want to see Two Towers every time. I still love that movie every time. So, I don't care if Helm's Deep isn't exactly the way it's supposed to be, guys. Like, it was dope, and I loved it. Shout out to Finland for tuning in. Thank you for saying that. We love everybody tuning in from across the world. Let's see. Is there anything else? Are we missing out? Galadriel. Hey, she's still in this. No, I'm just kidding. I like but it is funny how these episodes we do just kind of like leave off certain people and just kind of move around. But yeah, that was good.
The other elves were technically in this episode. They just didn't do much. Elrond and Gil-galad.
Elrond was just trying to get his run on like the whole time. Like he dropped the cloak. It was serious. I was like, oh boy, once you drop the cloak, you're really trying to get somewhere. But yeah, no, I mean, everything seems pretty balanced. And I know we're still getting a lot of negativity. Well, not a lot. It's just, it's always Facebook. You guys on Facebook are wild. But yeah, I can't say that I watched this at like the middle of the night at like 3 a.m. when I woke up, for my mid-set break of sleeping. And I was pretty up and engaged in it the entire time. So I definitely think things are picking up and this is kind of finding its footing with its story and focus. And so I hope that continues next. And yeah, we even got that was a Balrog tease, wasn't it? That Disa.
Yeah, I assume that's what she's sensing down there.
Yeah, did a little Jurassic Park thing. That was great. I like that.
I wonder
Although that gave me nightmares. I will say I'm a claustrophobic. I do not like anything that has to do that's why the descent freaks me out. Anything under the earth and stuff like that. So I did have some nightmares about that because she was squeezing through those places, and I was just like, "Come on, man, you guys are crazy. Dwarves are nuts." But yeah,
I do wonder if we'll see the Balrog and how much of it we'll see in all its glory. If we'll get maybe not this season, but before the end of the show, like a full just Balrog rampaging through Moria extended sequence or something like that, because that would be interesting to see. I mean, it would be pure if you're doing an extended scene like that, it's pure payoff or climax at that point. But if we're spending this much time with the dwarves, maybe we get there and earn that.
Yeah, seeing a Balrog versus a bunch of people with no hope of beating a Balrog is also going to be that'd be kind of fun because I mean, not for them, but for us to see like a bunch of dwarves taking on a Balrog would be like a bunch of ants swarming a fire snake. It'd be kind of crazy. So I'm hoping we get something like that. But I feel like the Balrog will be kind of teased again. It'll be like another. He just kind of comes in for cameos. He's like, I'll see you in season 3. We got a little tease in season 1. He gives another little tease in season 2. He's like the Thanos of this whole thing. So, finally he'll emerge by the third round. But other than that, I think we've done it. I think we've done it. I think we've done the thing. Is there anything else, Jamie, you'd like to add about this episode? Any kind of deeper cuts of Tolkien lore that we don't want to miss?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, we mentioned the White Tower briefly. That's the thing that you would see if you were going to Valinor. you would see that tower first. Like that's the first thing you see, and that's where the Numenorians are not allowed to go because Manwë, the Lord of the Valar, forbids them because that's not for them. And ultimately, that will be a problem for them. And then if you're wondering who those names that Sauron rattled off are when he was talking about the heroic men, those are all ancestors involved in Aragorn and Arwen's story. Beren is Beren of the Beren and Luthien story that Aragorn is singing about in the not the Return of the King, the Fellowship of the Ring, and throughout the Lord of the Rings. They are ancestors of Arwen, and then Tuor is one of the great men who lived with the elves and is the only man who got to go to where the Valar are and live eternally with the elves because he was so great. And he is the father of Arendil, who is the one who went and summoned the Valar to basically save the day against Morgoth. And then Arendil is the father of Elrond, who again is, Arwen's father, obviously. And Elros, the first king of the Numenorians, and therefore an ancestor of Aragorn. So that's all those name drops there. So yeah, I think that makes Arwen and Aragorn kind of like very distant cousins, by the way. But, this happens when you have people that are immortal or live for centuries. It's just unavoidable.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing also we really got to... I hope they really do just hammer that point just a little bit more, that like all these characters are going to live for a very long time either because they can or because of these magical artifacts that they come into contact with is... Yeah, I hope they stress that a little bit more and, time and what that means. You know what I mean? So that'll be it for this episode of Rings of Power Season 2, Halls of Stone. We want to thank everybody for tuning in and joining us on this live stream. We hope you guys are at least enjoying Rings of Power somewhat. If you're just here to rage, comment, it still kind of means you're enjoying it because you're taking that much of an effort. But I'm not here to dissect your psychology. We are Comic Book Nation, and we are an entire nation of podcasts. In addition to doing recaps of Rings of Power, we have regular segments every week, including our anime segment, Anime Initiative, every Tuesday, our comic book review segment, the poll list every Wednesday. And in addition to doing these recaps, we have our semi-regular gaming segment called Quick Save every Thursday. And on Fridays, we have the Comic Book Nation live show, which is now at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, where we talk about the week in geek and interact with all of you, the listening fans. Thank you, Jamie, for hopping on with me. Also coming up is we have a busy week. Next week, we have a bunch of shows coming out. We have Agatha All Along returning. We have Penguin dropping, Transformers. People are hitting me up right now about Transformers 1 stuff. So it's going to be a big week in geek next week. So tune in to Comic Book Nation and all our segments to keep up with it all. And, we'll see you out there. Peace.